Hello dear friends, Patrick here again. How you doing today? I'll be posting this video, I believe, on October 1st, 2024. So we're in a new month, October. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to share with you a video by a woman by the name of Bridget Gabriel. A very well-spoken woman. I don't know what her political affiliation is or her background, anything about it. I just saw the video posted through social media, and I thought I would share it with you because what she was talking about seemed quite significant. I've titled this video "The End of the Christian Religion," or the downfall of the Christian religion in the West. I'm not sure what I'm going to post it as, but we know that God is going to build his church, right? He says the gates of hell won't prevail against it. So I didn't say the Christian church is going to fail. I said the Christian religion is going to fail, and there's a reason why I use that term. So if you could take a second, I strongly encourage you to listen to what this woman has to say. She's talking about the country of Lebanon that used to be a Christian country. Again, this is Bridget Gabriel. I'm going to splice it in here. Please have a listen to what she has to say, and then we will talk briefly about it once she's done. So here you go.
Lebanon used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. Most people don't know that. When they think of the Middle East, they think it's all Islamic countries. But Lebanon is the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. We were open-minded, we were fair. We prided ourselves on our multiculturalism. We welcomed everyone to our country, especially from the surrounding Arabic countries, because we wanted to share with them the westernization which we had created in the heart of the Middle East. Muslims used to send their children to come study in our universities because we had built the best universities in the Middle East. They graduated and worked in our economy because we had built the best economy in the Middle East, even though we did not have any oil. Lebanon was known as Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. And as Christians, we focused on education. Education was very important to us. You know, we educated girls and boys, you know, no difference. We were living the good time. Unfortunately, all that began to change by the 70s because of two things. The enlargement of the Islamic population in Lebanon, because we Christians marry one spouse until death do us part. We don't have many kids. Muslims, on the other hand, are allowed to marry up to 4 wives at a time. Now, of course, not all of them do it, but enough of them do it that in our country, in Lebanon, by the 70s, the Muslims became the majority. And once they became the majority, they started massacring the Christians and killing the Christians. I remember in 1974, we stopped traveling. We used to go spend Christmas and Easter in Beirut with the rest of my family. And we stopped traveling, and I would ask my father, why aren't we going to Beirut for Christmas this year? And my daddy would say to me, well, we just decided to stay home this year. And, you know, I couldn't understand why. And later I learned is because Muslims started setting up fly-by-night checkpoints, and they would stop Christian cars traveling. And when they would get people out of the car and look at their ID and find out that this is a Christian family traveling, because in Lebanon, our religion is written on our national ID, on your driver's license, on your passport. So when they see that this is a Christian family traveling, they would get everyone out of the car and shoot them in cold blood. So we became prisoners to our homes and our cities and our communities. And that's the reason why we stopped going anywhere. By 1975, that's when the war broke out, the civil war. And the war broke out because Muslims walked into a church on a Sunday morning and began firing, shooting at Christian worshipers, and injured hundreds and killed 4 people. And that's what started out the all-out war. And it was a very difficult time for the Christians, because as the Muslims organized and now supported by the oil money flowing out of Saudi Arabia and all the Muslim countries, they wanted to basically use Lebanon as a base from which to fight Israel, kill the Jews and drive them into the sea, using Lebanese democracy and Lebanese open-mindedness and tolerance to do exactly that. And that's really when my world turned upside down and it changed. Lebanon was so multi-faith and multicultural. So we had Druze, Muslims, Christians, Protestant. The majority were Christians. We were over almost 70% Christians when we got our independence in the 40s. But because of the way Muslims multiply, you know, with the multiple wives and multiple kids, in 30 years, they became the majority. Mm-hmm. And when we got our independence from France and Lebanon, because we are, you know, Judeo-Christians, you know, come from Judeo-Christian culture, we're very fair. So we made sure we divided the government to make sure that Muslims have representation. So the president of the country was Christian, the prime minister was a Muslim, the prime minister, you know, the secretary of state. We had different assignments for different religions. But the Muslims became the majority. And once they became the majority, they were no longer tolerant of the people who took them in and accepted them and included them in the country. Mm. They felt they were not a part of the country. They felt they were a part of the Islamic Ummah or the Islamic nation. Okay. So when they turned against their brethren Christians who lived in the same country, and Jews, but specifically the Christians, they began massacring us in large numbers because they thought we are in power now and therefore we set the rules on how things should be. And that's really what drove the country into war. We had the problem controlled when it was only the Christians in Lebanon and the Muslims in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. But what aggravated the situation was the influx of the Palestinians out of Jordan who came to Lebanon. And Lebanon was the only country who took them in because we were the only country that accepted the third wave of Palestinian refugees while the Muslim countries did not want them. And that's what really changed the situation. That's what tipped the scale.
Hopefully that came through, that you were able to see what she had to say and how important that is. And she was giving the reasons why the Muslims were able to overpopulate the Christian population and the result of what happened. And that is currently happening today in Canada and also in the U.S., although I am not as familiar as what's happening in the U.S., but I do see that happening here in Canada. And the important thing to remember is that the Christian leaders, so-called leaders in Canada, are actively endorsing what is happening. They are actively endorsing massive immigration into our country, and they have taken the position of being passive. They have taken the position of surrendering to the side of passivity, apathy, and refusing to be involved in politics in any way. If you consider what the final instructions were to the Apostle Peter from our Savior Jesus, the last instructions he gave him was to feed the sheep. And he mentioned that 3 times. Now, Peter was apparently the first, you know, they say he's the first pope, and he's the sort of the leader of the ongoing Christian religion, if you want to call it that, down through history. The first, you know, evangelist, pope, leader, however you want to call him. And he obviously took those instructions to heart. And the Christian leaders in Canada today reject that teaching. They have no interest at all in feeding the sheep. They will browbeat the sheep, they will beat the sheep, they will break the sheep's legs, they will cripple the sheep. They're more than happy to do that. They feel that is their obligation. And of course, mostly they will fleece the sheep, of course, as well. They're more than happy to do that. But they have absolutely no interest in empowering the sheep. They have no interest in feeding the sheep and making them stronger. Their total efforts and their total focus is to browbeat the sheep, belittle them, make them feel ashamed, make them feel small, make them feel weak, make them passive, encourage them to give up. And this is directed through the state. It is directed directly through the Liberal government in Canada. In fact, even there are Christian leaders that pride themselves on being liberals. They pride themselves on being progressives, right? They have no interest in being conservative. They have no interest in feeding the sheep. And this is why we will see the downfall of the Christian religion in Canada in a very short period of time. Now, is there any solution to this? Is there any way that this could be reversed? you could say, well, maybe they'll introduce polygamy like the Muslim religion has. Obviously, that's not going to happen. That would never be of any interest in the social fabric of Western society. Both males and females would not be interested in such a setup, and of course, it's illegal. That would never happen. However, there is one other way that it could be. The Christian religion could survive, and that would be if they were to listen to the instructions of the tithe. The original intent of the tithe was to strengthen and bless God's people. That was the purpose of it. The Levites would collect the tithe, and they would set it aside in a storehouse, and people would be able to borrow from that community collected tithe. It was like a cooperative banking system. That tithe would be collected, and people would be able to borrow against it at a flat rate of 20% interest. So if you had to borrow $500,000 for a mortgage, you would pay back the principal plus 20%. So you'd pay back $600,000. If you borrow $500,000 from a Canadian bank, Canadian banks are involved in usury. Canadian banks would charge you double. They would say, okay, you borrow $500,000, well, you have to pay us back $1 million and then some. In fact, depending on the interest rate, it would never get paid back, depending on the payments. The way that the interest is calculated, you're paying the interest up front, and it is calculated on a declining balance method that the banks end up getting back more than the principal in interest payments. That's how it works in the Canadian banking system. Whereas the biblical banking system would be somebody would borrow $100,000, they would pay back $120,000. That's how that system was supposed to work. And so what the Christian leaders have done is they've taken the instructions about tithing and they've absolutely bastardized it. They've absolutely taken it in a wrong context, and they say, oh, you give us the tithe, and we're going to use that money to pay our salaries, to pay our infrastructure costs, and to pay off all the property that we're buying, and to pay our salaries. So we're going to decide what to do with that. We're not going to give any of it back to the congregation, and we'll give a pittance to charity. But this is what the Christian leaders in the West have done. And they use verses like Malachi 3:10, and they twist those scriptures around and say, God is telling you to bring your tithe into the storehouse, and then he's going to bless you. And it is absolutely wrong. It is a wrong interpretation of what the tithe is all about. God says, bring your tithe into the storehouse, and I'll bless you if you follow the instructions of how the tithe was supposed to work. But the Christian leaders don't tell you that. If they did, the Christian church would quickly prosper. The people that would be members of that church would prosper, and it would be a blessing to the entire Christian community. Wherever a Christian community meets, that community would prosper because of a cooperative banking system that would bless those people. And that would be the only way that the Christian church may survive, because that would give them prosperity, political clout, and on all the blessings that go along with being a prosperous segment of society. And that's not going to happen, because the purpose of the Christian leader is to impoverish the sheep. They want to browbeat them, want to break their legs, make them passive, make them obedient to the state, make them not to talk about politics, not to rock the boat. This is the purpose of the Christian leaders today in Canada. They are against Christians. Just like the Prime Minister is against Christians. He says that Christians are the worst members of society. He's on record as saying that. He is a practicing Muslim. His father was friends with the Aga Khan. He visited the Aga Khan his whole life. That is a leader of a particular sect of Muslims, and he calls himself a Catholic, but he has no connection to his Catholic roots at all. And so the Prime Minister is opposed to Christians. The Christian leaders are opposed to Christians. You have to remember that if you go to a Christian church in Canada, you will not be fed. They have no interest in feeding you. They have only an interest in fleecing you, browbeating you, making you passive, making you weak, and allowing these other cultures to come in and take over, just as they did in Lebanon. That's exactly what is on track for Canada as a nation. And if there was any possibility of the Christian religion to survive in Canada, that is what we need to pray for. We know that the Christian church in Canada will never die, because God will preserve his church until he returns, and he knows those who are obedient to him. Even Malachi 3:10, Malachi 3:15, it says that you have taken the arrogant and you have considered them blessed. You've taken people like Jesse Duplantis and Kenneth Copeland and people like Creflo Dollar and on, all these religious leaders who have bastardized the tithe, taken the tithe for themselves, fleeced the sheep, become arrogant about it, and then the Christian followers say, oh, that's good. Can you see how sick and twisted that is? That they have elevated the arrogant who have been disobedient to God's instructions and taken God's tithe for themselves and used it to live lavish lifestyles of greed and excess and gluttony and competing with one another over who can have the biggest house and who can have the biggest jet. It is sick, sick, sick in the head that the Christian leaders in the West have given themselves over to debauchery, greed, avarice, and total rebellion against God and his instructions to bless his children, both Jews and Gentiles. And that is a sad situation that we find ourselves in. So I hope you take it to heart, this video that I shared with you from this woman by the name of Bridget Gabriel, and pray, ask God to raise up a new Christian denomination, a new Christian leader. It's not going to happen through the current channels that exist. It would have to be somebody who is probably somebody that you wouldn't expect, perhaps, and that would have to implement these true principles from the Bible that would allow his people to prosper somehow. I can't imagine how that could ever happen. But God knows everything, and he knows what can work and what cannot work. That's why we are dependent upon him for the survival of the Christian religion in Canada. Otherwise, it will quickly be gone within 10, 20 years. There will be no more Christian religion in Canada. It'll be banned. It will be outlawed. There will be the Bible will be banned. The Christian religion will be banned, and we will become a Muslim country just like Lebanon, with the full support of the government, of course. So pray, ask God for a solution to allow us to escape what is so clearly happening right in front of our very eyes. And it's sad, because this is something that will not affect this generation, but the next generation and the generation after. That is why it is important that we do this, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of the future generations that hopefully can benefit from being able to live in a free and just society. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. I pray that you're doing well. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.